And record. All right. Welcome, everybody, to today's office hours. Let me go ahead and share my screen. I normally do that first, but we'll do it now. One of the things that I am guilty of quite frequently is whenever we're talking about workflows and kind of defining how workflows happen, how you set them up and stuff. A lot of times I kind of gloss over the groups section, and they can be an extremely powerful part of your workflow. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time actually going over the how and when to use workflow groups. Now, this may be a short office hours. Some of you may already know all of this, but I think it's worth going through and actually spending a little bit of time making sure that you guys do know how to use them and why and when to use them, because there's definitely some times that you want to use them and times that you do not. For those that don't know me, probably watching on replay, we have just a few people today, so hopefully you guys are catching us on replay. My name is Mark Stepp. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer here at Realvolve, and hoping to give you guys an understanding of real estate technology and creating a sustainable business. There's a lot of information out there that is available, and trying to understand the why and how you use all this stuff is really kind of what I'm best known for. So the agenda today, again, going over the how to streamline and refine your workflows with groups. And that may make more sense here in just a little bit, when to use the groups and maybe when to just use separate workflows. It's very important there. For those that have not seen previous office hours, you can go out to realvolve.com/office hours and access our replay list. And from here, you can see the most recent one that has done, which was last week on this. If there's other ones that you want to see, you can click on the little hamburger, kind of scroll through, find any topic that you might find interesting and go to it. One thing that is important to know is that these are hosted on YouTube. So you can just go out to our YouTube channel, click and subscribe, like those. We appreciate that. But whenever you go there, sometimes if we make reference to links or whatever, you'll need to go to the YouTube channel itself into the description area to get that content. So all that is there for you. Okay, and let's go ahead and talk about, let me go ahead and get this going. So groups are something that whenever I came to Realvolve, one of the things that I brought to Realvolve was an understanding of workflows and things that happen sometimes, but not always, and understanding how you can utilize those in a way that is most efficient for you. So a group is nothing more than kind of like a predefined collection of related tasks, activities, as part of that workflow, and designed to address specific aspects of a process. So a lot of words there. Basically, it's just a matter of saying, okay, there are certain activities that are grouped together, and that's part of this other. So each of these are encapsulated in a distinct area. You might have certain activities that are all related to maybe doing something with HOA or doing something with financial. It's part of a bigger workflow that does a whole bunch of things, but there's certain activities that are related to a certain aspect of that process. And we group them together, and thus we call them groups. The advantage of using groups is that you can quickly include or exclude sets of tasks based on the unique requirements or characteristics of a property workflow, a transaction workflow, or whatever, the workflow itself. So let's dive a little deeper in there and kind of talk about when to use groups. Now, for the most part, and we'll get into the actual setting up and process, but the majority of the time that you're going to use a group is either whenever there's minor differences in processes and you know before you start that workflow. Meaning if you start a workflow and it could be this or it could be that, but you know what it is ahead of time. If it's just some small tweaks in the workflow, I would set up a group for that and differentiate it based off of how that particular aspect of the workflow is going to be run. And an example of that might be HOA. Whenever you have a listing process, some properties have HOA, some do not. If you create a listing process and you have 10 activities or 5 activities that deal with HOA, you don't necessarily want to create an entirely new workflow just for HOA. But it's something that you do know before you start the workflow, whether they have HOA or not. Or in a transaction process, are they going to do a loan on there? Could it be a cash deal versus a loan? And whenever you start that workflow, if you know ahead time, customarily, you're going to be able to say, well, I want to exclude or include this loan process activities in this workflow, or I want to use the cash activities in this workflow. Everything else is the same. Why create multiple workflows that have just small differences whenever you can say, well, I want to include or exclude a certain group of them, of the activities, all in one shot. Likewise, or counter to that, would be when not to use groups. If there's many differences between processes, if you've got a workflow dealing with new construction sale versus existing residential sales, there's potentially a lot of differences in how you deal with those. And based off of how you deal with those, if there's a lot of differences, it's probably just better to make a separate workflow instead of having some activities be in a new construction group. You could do it if there are just a few changes, but if there's major differences, then it's really probably better just to use multiple workflows. The other time to use or not use a group is whenever it's something that when you don't know if something is going to happen when you start the workflow. The previous example was ahead of time whether they have HOA or not. Well, the counter to that would be, well, you may not want to start the inspection repairs section of a closing when you don't know that there's any inspection repairs to be done. And it might be safer just to create a separate workflow just for the inspection repairs. When and if that happens, you can start that workflow and just use a branching action. Once the inspection comes back, maybe you have a checklist option or an action that says, was there repairs? And if there were repairs, you can answer yes, and it automatically start the inspection repairs workflow for you when it's needed. Because you don't really want to add a bunch of activities to your calendar if you don't ever need them. So that's kind of the differentiations between them. The other time not to use groups is whenever you know that you're going to be processing it through a Zap. If a workflow is being started through Zapier, through an integration with Zapier, we don't have a way, because it's an automatic process, it just goes through. You don't necessarily have any ability to differentiate one thing or another in the groups. So that becomes a challenge. Now, you can, in a Zap, use, and you do have to have a probably a higher level paid version of Zapier, but they do have the ability to do uh, comparison of values and say, well, if it's this, go run this workflow. If it's that, go run this workflow. So you have some abilities to run separate workflows in a Zap. So if there are cases where you need differentiating workflows based off of lead field values that are coming in, the leads are from a certain area or a certain price range or something like that, and you want to run a different workflow based off of that area or that price range, you can set up a branching option within the Zap itself. But that does take a little bit more setup, and we may cover that in a different office hours. Not quite as frequently used, but something that can be powerful. Any questions about those two? When to use them or when not to use them? All right. So some examples, some real life examples of how you would use groups, and maybe this will spur some ideas on how you can make your workflows better. Okay. So whenever you have a workflow, there's always a default workflow called general. It's just a general group. It's just a general activity. It's used for lots of different purposes or whatever, but it's always there. Now you can create additional groups yourself, just user defined, and some of the ones that you might create, like in a contact workflow, it might be communication preferences. Maybe you've got a workflow that does a series of phone calls, SMS messages, emails, and does all the communication back and forth. Maybe some emails are the same as some of the SMS text messages. Maybe you make a phone call that is similar to the content in an email or whatever. You're sending communication, but maybe you have some people that prefer one form of communication over another. Maybe they don't use SMS, Lord forbid, but they are just not big SMS people, probably older crowd, but or maybe they don't ever answer their phone. So why do a phone unless you just want to always leave messages? But what you could do is go in there and say, well, each of my activities are a particular type: phone call, SMS, email. Now we have those as types, but you could also create them as groups so that whenever you start the workflow, if somebody just says, don't ever call me, just send me text, or just email or whatever, you could uncheck the groups that they don't want communication with and exclude them out of the process. Now you want to make sure that whenever you're doing that maybe you've included them somewhere else just for verification. But this way you can tailor that workflow to an individual whenever you start it, but you got to know ahead of time, do they prefer phone calls, emails, or SMS? Another one would be holidays. Now, I know different people get anxious about this at times, but some people don't do Christmas. Some people do Hanukkah. Some people do, all the different religions and stuff that are out there. If you've got a holiday workflow of some sort, and you want to address more of the beliefs of that person, maybe you have the majority of the year are they're secular, they're non-religious or whatever, but maybe a few of them are. Or maybe the differences between Canada and US, maybe you've got customers in multiple areas or whatever, and their Thanksgiving is different than our Thanksgiving, things like that. So your holidays might go in there and say, well, 90% of mine are all right, but I've got Christmas. Let's put that as a Christian holiday, and Hanukkah as a Jewish holiday. And if they're Christian, if they're Jewish, if they're neither, they don't do either one, you can uncheck them. And then it create the workflow based off of what they want. Now, if you're creating the workflow, from you, happy, whatever, and that's your belief and you want to do it, that's fine too. But just an option there. The other one might be contact frequency. Now you can set up separate workflows for, contact them weekly, contact them monthly, contact them every quarter or whatever. You can certainly do that. The other option might be to set up certain patterns in your workflow where it talks about frequency, and then you can check which options by group, how frequently do you want to contact them. Another one might be, are they a buyer prospect, are they a seller prospect, or are they both? And while most people will create those as separate workflows, if they're very similar, it may come down to just changing which one is which, and then you're going to choose whether they're a buyer, seller, or both. Again, you wouldn't want to do that if you're using those as zaps coming in. You wouldn't want to use any kind of group necessarily on a zap type of workflow, but others that you control, you start separate from the zap, it would actually be a potentially good idea. Any other ones that you guys can think of that might be of interest for people to think of? Anything come to mind for you guys?
So it's Jim. So I did an open house this weekend and had a bunch of the leads that came into the system based on what you and I spoke about. And I just literally set up all the workflows for all those leads that came from the open house. And it's all the same open house, and it's the same buyer lead flow. So I'm trying to think about using exactly what you're saying to convert it when it's already started. Can that be done after the fact?
So the way workflows work, once you start a workflow, it basically makes a copy of the workflow definition itself on that person or on that property or transaction. So once you start a workflow, any changes to that workflow after the fact don't get implemented until you start it again on somebody else or whatever. So, kind of after the fact, it's a little too late, but you can, obviously go in and stop the workflow, restart it or whatever. But for an open house, the question might be, whenever you're saying are you setting up separate open house workflows? Is that what you're doing? I'm not sure I understood that.
Well,
exactly.
no, I need to set up that, but based on our conversation earlier about the back end side, the leads coming in, they may not have shown up, but they inquired on the particular property. So now that workflow is set up as a buyer workflow. So they're all going to have the same mechanisms, text, email, etc. So obviously you can't group call everyone, but you could probably group email or text instead of going in each one, even though they're actually automated. So I really don't need to worry about it per se.
Yeah, not necessarily. Whenever you've got that lead coming in from Zapier and doing the automated stuff, that's one thing. If you're doing them manually, definitely another. Many Realvolve users will set up a registration form on an iPad, and they can type in their name or even use a QR code and use their own phones and fill in like a Google form, and then it sends that information to there. Now, what I will typically do in those cases for open houses is the form itself would be a separate form, and on that form have a field for the address as a tag or whatever, as a field that they don't necessarily change. It's just that's the value of it. And then whenever that gets zapped in, or they fill out that form, it goes into the spreadsheet and then it gets zapped into Realvolve. You can use the interested in field for that contact record as a kind of a merge field for any communication for SMS. Thank you for visiting us at 123 South Main Street. That 123 South Main Street could be a field in the form. And then the next open house you do, just change that form to have, 234 West Oakland, whatever it is. So that whenever it sends it to that same spreadsheet, it's filling out the Oakland address as a separate field. And that's more of a merge field type difference, where groups is more identifying certain activities that you would or would not do whenever you start that workflow. And it is different, but I think in your particular case where you're talking about the actual open house itself, it would just be a matter of changing the what is the address of that property, and the easiest thing to do there, just use some kind of form for that.
Yeah. Got it. Okay.
Cool.
Yep.
Okay. So that is for contacts. Then it gets a lot more broader whenever you start talking about property type groups, things that you'd set up a workflow for that again, could or could not happen, but you're going to know ahead of time whenever you actually start the workflow what it actually is, or if that value is true or false or whatever. Some typical uses is whether or not you're going to send out a coming soon type of content. Sometimes it's you've got a property, you're going to go through the listing process, and they want it on the market right away. There's, it's just bam, 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 go through. Other times, it takes a little bit of staging and setup and things, and you want to do a coming soon section. Now, you could create a separate coming soon workflow, obviously. The other option would be include the coming soon section, the activities that you would do. Maybe it's just one or two emails, at the very beginning of your entire listing process. And if you choose that, I want to do the coming soon, it would be checked. If you don't want to do it, you would uncheck it. And we'll show that process here in a few minutes. But it's just identifying something that could or could not happen whenever you start that workflow. HOA, do I have a homeowners association with this particular house? Will it have, home warranty? Am I doing staging? Am I doing professional photography versus maybe staff photography? I've got to do a few extra things if I'm doing it through a professional. I've got to get appointments set up and, check time. There's things that have to be done differently for professional versus, hey, Mary, just go out there and, take some shots, depending on what you're going to do. And the activities post that photography would be different. So there's a minor difference of how you do a workflow process based off of whether it's professional or staging or staff versus professional. If you're doing staging or not, if you're doing broker open versus public open houses. There might be certain houses that you are going to do open houses for, if you guys are doing open houses in your areas still. Some people don't do that. But if you do, Are you doing both a public and a broker, or do you just do public, or do you just do broker? And some of the things may be very common, but there might be a few minor differences whether you're doing both. And instead of creating separate workflows for one for public, one for broker, then set them up as a group. Was this an agent referral versus a non-agent referral? You want to send thank yous and updates and things like that as part of the workflow process. But if there wasn't a referral at all, you don't want to have to send anything. If it was an agent referral versus a non-agent referral, you're going to do different things. So these are just different things that you might do during the listing process, during the marketing process, the pre-listing, just different groups that you might put together to do these things. Does that ring true with everybody? Yeah. Transactions gets even bigger, broader, deeper, and probably the biggest use is during the transaction period, especially with all the muckety muck that's been going on with the inventory and how people are willing to forego certain things that they really shouldn't forego, but in lieu of not getting the list or not getting the property under contract or whatever, maybe they have forgone certain things. It's a wrong word, but are they doing an appraisal or not? Well, almost always you're going to do the appraisal, but potentially, if you're doing a cash deal, you just want to get it, whatever. If you do a lot of those, HOA again, are you doing a home inspection or not? Does it have a home warranty? Is there a loan process? If there's no loan process, we don't need to do all the loan things. It's a cash deal. I don't need to do a lot of the loan processing pieces that I might do to check with the lender, to follow up with certain things. Are we doing the pest inspection, the pool inspection? If there's no pool, we don't need to do an inspection. Radon, staging removal, is there staging or not? Well, if there's not, then we don't need to do all the removal processes. Roof inspections, these are things, if in your area there are certain things that you do all the time, no matter what, you don't need these. But if there's certain situations or conditions that sometimes you don't, add it as a group for those particular activities, and then you can quickly unmark them and remove them from the list. Second deposit, some areas do first and second deposit, some don't. Septic, sewer inspections, well inspections. If you're on a well, you don't need those well inspections if you're on a city water or whatever. A buyer referral, seller referral. Are you representing the buyer or the seller? Now, in most cases, you're probably going to have those as separate workflows because there are some significant changes, but there might be a smaller workflow that you do where representation makes a small minor difference, and maybe it's something in that realm. Backup offer, when you're starting this workflow, do you know that there's a backup offer already? And if you do, then there might be some additional things that you might do, or some additional emails that you might need to send out based off of there being a backup offer or not. Water inspection under construction, condo. Is this a condo versus maybe even multifamily, residential, whatever. Tenanted units, if you're doing any kind of rental stuff, is it got a tenant in it? And if it has a tenant in it, then you're probably going to needing to communicate with them somehow. And if there's no one in there, then you can turn that off. You don't need to send it to anybody. Inspection repairs. Now, inspection repairs is probably more a separate workflow. simply because you don't necessarily know whether there's going to be repairs or not. But if you're doing a lot of maybe the repos and something, there's almost always inspection repairs, but maybe sometimes there's not, then you might put it in there as an option, and just turn it off as needed. Follow-ups, dry rot inspection, due diligence, any special condition. Is there a buyer sale of home condition, financing condition, home inspection condition? These are all different things that I've seen agents use as groups very effectively, very efficiently. And by doing this, the real advantage of having these groups is that you can have one workflow to do all these different things and optionally exclude things that you don't need at the time you run that workflow, versus having many different workflows that you have to start and run the chance of not starting one that you really need. So it's kind of up to you on how you want to do that. Any questions on those or thoughts? Awesome. All right. So to set up the workflow, whenever you go into Realvolve, you clicking on your plus, you start a workflow. There's this section here for groups, and that's what we're going to start talking about, is just how you set up a group and how you utilize it within the system. So you create a workflow, or you've got some of your workflows there. By default, it will always have the general workflow. Okay, it's there. Like I said earlier, you can't remove it, you can't rename it or anything. You can add additional ones. Actually, I think I've got all these on here. The default is general. You can add groups to a workflow. Actually, you can have up to 20 different groups on any given workflow. So you can add 19 of your own. I've never seen anybody ever go that high, but I've seen 10 to 12 in some of those big transaction ones. The one transaction that I was looking at a couple weeks ago, there was 156 different activities that got done, and I think they had like 12 or 13 different additional groups that they were using. It's pretty amazing to see the velocity or the frequency of use of this, and how it just makes it a lot easier. She was saying, it's so much easier to use the groups than to have separate workflows for the different aspects of what could or couldn't be as part of an entire workflow process. Whenever you click that add button, or add group, it will open up a new area so that you can start typing in. You just type in the text is all you're doing. No big deal. Whatever you type in there is the group name. So you add all the groups that you want, and you can add them after the fact. Whenever you're adding activities, you get to one, it's like, oh, I should have added XYZ group. Go back up, add the group, update it, and then it'll be available for you to choose from. So it's just a matter of adding the different groups to the workflow. The main things to take from that section of it is you can have up to 20 groups. You can delete groups. And whenever you delete a group, it does set it back to general. So if you had an activity set for HOA and you deleted the HOA group, it's going to send all those activities that were grouped in HOA back to general, just to let you know. You can add and remove groups at any time. Whenever you're going through there, just know that those group changes don't take effect until you start the workflow again, like the question earlier about starting workflows. If you rename a group, maybe you change it from HOA to homeowners association or vice versa, If you change it in the general in the setup area, it'll change it for all of the other ones. They're really just linked by an ID, so no big deal. So if you misspell a group, you can go back and you can change it without a problem. Different workflows can have different groups. I did have a question where it's like, well, am I limited to only the 20 groups in all of Realvolve? No, each workflow has its own definition of groups. So you can have as many different workflows that have varying different types of groups and have more than 20 total group names, but they're sprinkled in amongst all the different workflows. So no big deal there. Group named the same in different workflows are technically different groups. So if you have two workflows, you've got an HOA group here and you've got an HOA group here, technically they're different group IDs. Not that that's a big deal, but just because you select one group in one thing doesn't mean you're selecting something in another. That was a question one time. And definitely make sure that you use group names that make sense for that activity grouping. If you're doing something with homeowners associations, HOA or homeowners association would be the appropriate naming type on that. So kind of the setup part of it, which is just this screen right here, kind of defines that. Now, and the little X there is how you delete them. Whenever you create one, there's a little X to the right. Just click that and it will delete that group from the system. Now, in the activity itself, after you've added your groups and you come into an actual activity, we've got a section here for groups. And whenever you click on the down arrow, these are all the different groups that are defined up here in this section up here. If you've got many, there'll be a scrolling list. So, it won't show them all, but you can scroll up and down and be able to access those. So each activity is assigned to a particular group. You can only assign an activity to one group. So if you just don't have the ability to multi-group any particular activity. It just can't be done. Once you select it, it's there. If you delete it, again, it will set it back to general. Important thing now. So once you've defined all of your activities in your workflow, you've got them all set up, this is where the magic actually happens. Whenever you start that workflow, you go to a contact, a property, or transaction, you click on the little start a workflow button. It'll ask you which workflow, and then it'll come to this screen right here. It will show you all the defined groups in that workflow. At this point, it does default all of them as checked, which basically by having them checked also makes sure that all of the individual activities themselves are all checked as well. If you go in and you uncheck a particular group, say in this case loan, then it will go through all of the activities, no matter how you have, if you had that 156 transaction activity list, if 10 of them, 15 of them were all loan items, then it would uncheck all those. That's the other major advantage of this, is by unchecking one thing, you can deselect many different activities that are all part of that group and get them out of the workflow. You don't need them for whatever process for this particular transaction, this particular property or contact. So why have them? You uncheck it, it unchecks them in the list, and then whenever you start the workflow, it'll just add the activities that are checked. No big deal. The opposite is also true. So you could unselect everything. Let's say, for instance, we had started this workflow. They said they were going to do it as a cash deal, and life situation happened, and all of a sudden, yeah, I guess we do need to do a loan. You could go back and restart the same workflow. You can uncheck all the items except for the loan one, and then it would keep just those loan activity items in there, and you can start those. So in the event that you did not select something that you wanted in there later, you can just go back and re-add it in. Just run the workflow again. Just be cautious not to run the same checklist. Make sure you uncheck the things that you've already run. Otherwise, you will get duplicates. Trying to think if there's anything else there that is pertinent. Guess not. So whenever you do have just certain checked items and you've got some things that are unchecked, only the checked activities that use certain date fields will be in the list. So for instance, if you don't have an HOA, you unchecked HOA, none of the activity milestone dates would have any kind of HOA related type date fields in here because they pertain to activities dealing with HOA, if that's part of the calculation of that workflow activity. Same thing for buyers, the party members, the buyers, the sellers, any party member. If you're not doing professional photography, it may not include the photographer, even though you might put that as staff, I guess. But the lender, if you weren't doing a loan process, it wouldn't show the lender as a party member if that activity was part of the workflow but not selected. It won't be in the list. Trying to make that as streamlined as possible. Then, whenever this here should be only the activities. It explained. So at this point now, I've started the workflow. All the items that I had unchecked are excluded from the activity list. Only the ones that were checked that I wanted in the list are actually here and available. And then I start doing my workflow process like I normally would. And that's it. I mean, in a nutshell, it's a matter of helping you streamline the creation of the workflow, but also streamline the process once that workflow is created so that you can quickly uncheck and check the things that you want. Instead of making multiple workflows for a similar but different aspect of the same process, you can just use groups to say, well, I only want to exclude certain aspects of the items in this workflow instead of creating an entirely new workflow itself. Does that make sense, guys? Okay, any questions? Any thoughts? James, did that clarify maybe a little bit more about your question earlier? Because I think there might have been a little confusion about the groups.
Yeah, it definitely helps out for me and what I'm trying to figure out. Side question would be separate from this. Sorry, people. Is there an easy way to archive workflows that I'm not using so I don't lose them and just archive them so they're not all in the screen?
Yeah, we have been asked that, and I need to probably have an archive option. Technically, you can go in and you can delete it, and it throws it into the trash. And if you don't empty your trash, you can restore it. but you do run the risk of, if you empty the trash, it going away forever.
Yeah.
Most of them you can reinstall anyway. So if it's something that you've purchased or whatever, and you just haven't used, you haven't modified them at all, then you can certainly do that. The other thing that I am guilty of a lot is just renaming it and actually it's not in this one. I will rename anything that I don't use very often. I'll rename it and prefix it with triple Z's, Z, and that way it's always at the end of the list.
So okay,
that just kind of gets it out of the way. The other thing is if there's certain ones that I use all the time, and again, I'm not doing it in here, is I will prefix it with some stars. So let me go to, this one. If I do stars here and update that, whenever I refresh this list, that's interesting.
It'll move them up to the top.
It should move them up to the top. Maybe it's not stars. I've used, you can use different characters and stuff. It puts it in alphabetical order. So numericals go first, and then alphanumericals, the A through Z, comes after that. So if you want to put in zeros at the very beginning to mark those that you use all the time, you can certainly do that.
Okay, cool.
Good question, though. Good question. Any other questions? Okay. Most of the other things that I have left are just talking about premium services. If a lot of this is confusing to you, you don't feel comfortable creating workflows or whatever, we do have our premium services department that allows you to sign up, subscribe. It's costs. Basically, you're hiring an assistant to do some of the things or train you through certain things. There's things they'll have you do. There's things that they'll instruct for you and have a navigator will go through and actually help navigate the process for you, and it's a good thing. Any other helps, and we've got how-tos, we've got submitting a support ticket, help button, and all that. So guys, that's all I've got for today, and we're about 9 minutes ahead. So unless there's other questions, I can stay around for other questions if you want. That's all I've got for the training portion. Anybody have anything else? Going once? Okay. All right, guys. Have a great day. Talk to you later. Bye.